It was a quiet Friday night in Atlanta when the neon glow of streetlights flickered against the damp sidewalks. Most people hurried home, eager to escape the sudden drizzle. But for Cassandra Reed, the evening had no urgency. She walked calmly, shoulders squared, eyes sharp, and her posture unshakable, the kind that came from years of military training. To strangers, she might look like an ordinary black woman in her early 40s, wearing jeans and a simple jacket. But behind her steady presence was a history carved by discipline, courage, and sacrifice. Cassandra wasn't just any woman. She was a decorated U.S. Army general, though few civilians would recognize her without the uniform. She had just returned from visiting an old friend at a nearby veteran center, a place she often supported quietly, without fanfare. As she crossed the dimly lit block toward her car, she noticed flashing red and blue lights bouncing off the wet pavement. 2 police cruisers idled at the curb, their sirens cut, but engines rumbling. 3 officers stood outside, their voices carrying sharp tones that echoed in the narrow street. Cassandra slowed her pace. Something in their body language spoke of trouble brewing. The officers' attention wasn't on her at first. They had cornered a nervous young man, no older than 20, who stammered as he tried to explain himself. Cassandra's instincts kicked in. She had seen this kind of tension before, in combat zones where one wrong move sparked chaos. She stayed at a distance, watching closely. But then, as if sensing her presence, one officer turned and caught sight of her. His eyes narrowed, suspicion flaring instantly. "Hey!" he barked, stepping forward. "What are you doing here?" Cassandra kept her voice calm, even just heading to my car. But the officer's partner moved in, baton tapping against his palm. "ID now." Cassandra froze for a brief moment, not out of fear, but out of disbelief at how quickly suspicion had shifted toward her. Years of service had taught her patience under pressure, but here she was, back home on American soil, being treated like a criminal simply for existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. She pulled out her wallet slowly, careful not to make any sudden moves that could be twisted into something else. "My ID's right here," she said steadily, handing it over. The officer snatched it without a word, glancing at it briefly before scoffing. "Reed, huh? You live around here?" "Yes, a few blocks down." His partner circled her like a predator, baton still tapping against his hand. "Funny, you don't look like you belong here. You look like trouble." Cassandra clenched her jaw, but kept her voice measured. "I belong exactly where I choose to be. And right now, I'm just trying to get to my car." The youngest officer, who had been silent until now, shifted uneasily. "She's not the one we're questioning," he muttered, but the senior cop waved him off. "Quiet. I'll decide who's suspicious." That's when it escalated. The senior officer stepped closer, invading Cassandra's personal space. "Something about your attitude rubs me the wrong way. You think you're better than us." "I think you're making a mistake," Cassandra replied calmly, her eyes unflinching. The words only fueled him. Without warning, the baton swung and cracked against her shoulder. The sting jolted through her body, but she didn't flinch the way they expected. Years of battlefield injuries had hardened her tolerance for pain. Still, the insult of being struck like a criminal burned deeper than the bruise forming under her jacket. "Stop resisting," the officer shouted, even though she hadn't moved an inch. His partner joined in, shoving her backward toward the wall. The young officer hesitated, torn between duty and conscience, but fear kept him frozen. Cassandra's hand twitched, not toward violence, but toward restraint. She could have dropped these men in seconds. Her training made sure of that, but she forced herself to hold back. The situation wasn't about what she could do, but about how far they would go without realizing who they were really dealing with. The tone wasn't a request. It was a threat. The blows came harder now, each strike of the baton echoing through the narrow street. Cassandra's back hit the wall, the cold brick pressing against her as the officers closed in. A small crowd began to gather at the corner, drawn by the flashing lights and shouts. Cell phones came out, recording shaky footage as whispers spread to the onlookers. Cassandra's chest rose and fell steadily. She had endured worse, shrapnel wounds, mortar fire, nights where sleep meant death. But this was different. These weren't enemies on foreign soil. These were men sworn to protect their community, lashing out at her simply because they saw her as less. One baton strike landed across her ribs, forcing her to suck in a breath. Still, she didn't raise a hand to defend herself. She thought of her soldiers, the ones who had followed her orders overseas, the ones who had trusted her strength. If she retaliated here, the headlines would paint her as the aggressor. She knew the game. "Why aren't you fighting back?" the senior officer sneered, gripping her arm roughly. "Too scared." Cassandra locked eyes with him, her voice low and firm. "Because I don't need to fight you, but you'll regret every second of this." The words unsettled him, though he tried to mask it with another shove. The younger officer stepped forward finally, his nerves cracking. "Sarge, this isn't right." "She's not resisting. We're on camera." "Shut up," the senior snapped, but the crowd's murmurs grew louder. And then it happened. One man in the crowd gasped as Cassandra's wallet slipped from the officer's grip and fell open on the ground. The military ID card glinted under the streetlight. The bold print read, "Major General Cassandra Reed, United States Army." For a moment, everything froze. The younger cop bent down, eyes widening as he read it. His face went pale. The crowd erupted in shocked whispers. The senior officer, still clutching his baton, glanced at the ID, but his pride fought against reason. "Could be fake," he muttered, yet doubt flickered in his eyes. Cassandra, bruised but steady, looked directly at him. "Do I look like someone who needs to fake that?" The crowd pressed closer now, voices rising with outrage. "She's a general," someone shouted. "You idiots are beating a war hero." Phones stayed lifted high, every angle capturing the brutality that had just unfolded. Cassandra stood tall despite the pain lacing through her body, her presence commanding even without the uniform. The younger officer stepped back, his face drained of color. "Sir, we need to stop. If this gets out—" "It's already out," a bystander interrupted, waving his phone. "The whole world's going to see this." For the first time, doubt etched itself across the senior officer's hardened expression. But pride was a dangerous thing, and instead of apologizing, he doubled down. He jabbed the baton toward Cassandra's chest. "Even if you're military, you think that makes you untouchable? Nobody's above the law." Cassandra's lips curved into the faintest, coldest smile. "You're right. Nobody is. That includes you." Before the tension could snap further, a sudden roar filled the street. Tires screeching, doors slamming. 3 black SUVs pulled up, headlights blinding. Men and women in tactical gear poured out, moving with precision only one group could manage. The insignia on their jackets was unmistakable. FBI. The agents spread out quickly, guns drawn but aimed downward, their voices sharp and commanding. "Federal agents. Step away from her, now." The entire street seemed to hold its breath. The senior cop faltered, baton still in hand, but the sight of a dozen federal agents closing in made his bravado shrink. Cassandra didn't move. She simply straightened her jacket, as if brushing off dust, her eyes never leaving the officer who had struck her. The FBI lead agent, a tall woman with piercing eyes, approached her directly. "General Reed, ma'am, are you all right?" The crowd gasped again. Confirmation from the feds erased any lingering doubt. Cassandra nodded slightly. "I'm fine, but these men have a problem." The agents didn't hesitate. Within seconds, the officers who brutalized her found themselves disarmed, hands wrenched behind their backs, faces shoved against the same squad car they had leaned on minutes earlier. The younger officer stood frozen, caught between fear and relief as his partners were cuffed. The crowd erupted, their cheers and shouts echoing against the brick walls. Phones captured every second as the once dominant officers now stood humiliated, their badges confiscated, wrists bound in steel. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. They had beaten a woman they thought powerless, only to discover she outranked nearly everyone they had ever met. The lead FBI agent guided Cassandra a few steps away from the chaos. "Ma'am, we've been monitoring complaints in this precinct for months. Tonight gave us what we needed, on record, undeniable." Cassandra inhaled deeply, the sharp pain in her ribs reminding her of every strike. Still, she stood tall, shoulders squared as if she were back in front of her troops. "Good," she said quietly, "because this isn't just about me. It's about how many others they've done this to who couldn't fight back, who didn't have cameras watching." The agent's eyes softened with respect. "Understood, General. We'll make sure this goes where it needs to." Behind them, the senior officer shouted in protest as he was shoved into the back of an FBI vehicle. "This is a setup. She provoked us." But his words sounded weak, drowned out by the roar of the crowd. The younger officer, however, hadn't been cuffed. He stood trembling, his gaze fixed on Cassandra. "I tried to tell them," he said, almost pleading. "I knew it was wrong." Cassandra studied him for a long moment. "Then next time, don't just know, act. Integrity means nothing if you bury it in silence." His head dropped, shame washing over him. The agents finished securing the scene, dispersing the crowd as best they could, though many refused to leave, still buzzing with adrenaline. Cassandra remained calm in the center of it all, a living reminder of dignity under fire. The FBI lead turned back to her. "We'll escort you to a hospital, ma'am. You need to be checked." Cassandra shook her head. "Later. Right now, I want statements taken from these witnesses. Their voices matter more than mine tonight." Her insistence carried weight, and the agent nodded. It was the same kind of command Cassandra had given in war zones, measured, focused, selfless. And even here, on a city street drenched in red and blue lights, her leadership refused to dim. Hours later, the street was quiet again, though the echoes of what happened lingered in every corner. Cassandra sat on the back bumper of an ambulance, not because she needed it, she had endured worse, but because protocol demanded it. A medic gently wrapped her shoulder while she kept her gaze on the horizon, the flashing lights fading as FBI vehicles pulled away with their captives. News vans had already begun circling, reporters rushing to catch the story. Cameras pointed toward her, voices calling her name, but Cassandra ignored them. She wasn't here for spectacle. Her life had been dedicated to service, not fame. The FBI lead agent approached once more, clipboard in hand. "General, we'll be issuing a formal statement tomorrow. The Justice Department is already involved. These officers, they won't see another badge again." Cassandra gave a slow nod. Justice isn't about stripping uniforms. It's about rebuilding trust. Make sure the people see accountability, not just arrests. The agent studied her, almost in awe. "You still sound like you're giving orders." Cassandra allowed a faint smile. Old habits. From the sidewalk, the crowd that hadn't dispersed began chanting her name. "Reed! Reed! Reed!" The sound was both humbling and heavy. She had fought wars overseas, defended her country against enemies it could name. Yet here she was, fighting another battle in her own streets, one against ignorance, prejudice, and abuse of power. The young officer approached cautiously, guilt written across his face. "General Reed," he said softly, I'll do better. I promise." She looked at him with the same stern compassion she had given countless young soldiers. "Then keep that promise. The uniform means nothing if the heart inside it fails." As dawn broke, Cassandra finally stood, her body aching but her spirit unshaken. She glanced at the sky, painted with streaks of gold, and whispered to herself, "For those who couldn't stand, I'll keep standing." And with that, she walked toward her car, bruised but unbroken, a living testament to resilience. The cameras caught her silhouette disappearing into the sunrise, a general not just of the military, but of justice itself.